So in this video, I want to have a really honest conversation with you about hourly rate as a real estate agent. Because the reality is most agents, they don't really know what they're making per hour. And really by knowing the simple key metric, it will allow you to understand what your true value is and give you some ideas on how to increase your hourly rate per client. So this video is actually inspired by an exercise that we do with our team and our clients to help with delegation. The big idea behind this is really simple. We ask two questions. What is the annual financial goal and what is our hourly rate? The reason behind this is really simple. We want to reverse engineer some math to understand what's required to get us to our goals. And the example I always like to use is, let's say that we want to identify a goal as we want to make a 7-figure year. We want to make $1 million, and that let's say that our hourly rate is $1,000 per hour, for example. But what we end up finding out is that if we end up doing $10 an hour tasks, it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to get to our 7-figure goal. Now, my goal for today's video, it's actually real simple. I want to give you a basic framework to follow to help you compute your hourly rate and how much you're making per deal. And once we've identified that number, I want to give you some actionable things to do to try to improve that number and really make more money with less time. But first, I want to start with some basic concepts to build up this utility that I'm about to explain to you. And it is that we have to look at the average life cycle of a transaction from start to finish. The reality of this is that usual life cycle, it's a really long time. And I always like to use the example of maybe helping a buyer find a home. Now, for example, there's a series of events or tasks that you need to do in order to convince a complete stranger or maybe a referral buyer to trust you with this purchase. And then that in itself will take months, if not years, to accomplish. Now, once they've committed to you, then the effort really transitions from marketing to fulfillment and guiding this buyer through the process of maybe getting connected with a lender, going through a pre-approval process, holding them accountable, showing property, then going through escrow, putting out fires from the escrow, and finally closing the deal. Again, this is another several month long ordeal to take on. And really the reality of this is if you misuse your time, when all of the dust settles and you finally get your commissions check and you really compute the amount of time you put in, you actually might find that you're maybe making less than minimum wage. Now, obviously, this is a pretty big exaggeration, but it also could be true. And truly, by knowing your true value and what you're worth based off of this transaction, it's either gonna make you feel really, really good, or it could be completely disheartening. And personally, I think this is because we as agents and entrepreneurs, we get sucked into the time investment that maybe we've made toward a client, saying that, I've done all this work already, I might as well just see this through to the end. Not realizing that at a certain point in time, the investment of time ends up providing a diminishing return. Now, there's actually a term for this. It's called the sunk cost fallacy. By the way, I did a whole video on the sunk cost fallacy, leaving the card up here. But anyways, there is a way to fix this problem, so let's talk about it. Now, the system here that I want to talk about, it really just boils down to time tracking. So one of the things that we do, an exercise that we do with our clients, is to help them time track really what they're working on using a very, very simple Google spreadsheet. So this is the spreadsheet here. By the way, if you want access to the spreadsheet, I'm going to leave the link in the description below so you can play around with it yourself. But let me explain to you very quickly like the anatomy of how to use this spreadsheet so that you can better use it as a utility for what you're doing on your day-to-day and really helping with transactions. Now, the idea behind this is simple. Every single day, we want to be logging the activities that we do per client, and we want to estimate the amount of time and effort that we do on that activity. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to name the tab per client. And obviously you can just use this as a template. If you right click and duplicate, then you can just right click and duplicate and then type in the client name. But once you've created the client name, the next thing you're going to want to do, I should say, is put the date that you did this task for this client and then the estimated time and effort that you did to complete the task. So let's say, I don't know, you had a conversation or you took this prospect out to lunch and that was like an hour investment, or maybe a 2-hour investment because it was an hour of eating with them and then a half an hour to get over to the restaurant and a half an hour to get back. So we're going to want to put that here, and then obviously you're going to want to categorize the activity. So it's really boiled down into two types of activities. The first one being marketing, which is trying to convince this prospect to become a client. And then the next one is fulfillment. Now that this client is your client, what are you going to do or what are the tasks needed to be done in order to get this client to the goal? And then lastly, you're going to want to put in the description of the actual activity or activities that corresponded with this particular date. Now the trick here is that you need to make a daily routine of updating these trackers per client because at the end of the day, once you're able to close escrow, then this hourly calculator here becomes super valuable. Right here on columns F and G. The yellow columns are the columns where you're going to need to input some information. And the magic part about this cool little time tracker spreadsheet is that it'll automatically give you the calculations as a return in terms of some numbers. So number one, I want you to put in what you believe your hourly rate is. Is it 100 an hour? Is it 500 an hour? Is it 1,000 an hour? And then once a deal closes, what does that commission check look like? What is your GCI, your net, I should say, after all the expenses are paid? How much did you end up making? Is it 24K, 50K, 60K, 10K, 12K? What is that final number? Now, all of these other pieces of information are calculations based off of all of the data that's inputted in the B field, in the time estimated field. And this is really how you can interpret it. Estimated time investment is really a calculation based off of your hourly rate and what your net profit is. How much time should you have spent with this client in order to make your hourly rate number, all right? Total hours is actually just the summation of all of the time you've invested with this client to get them to the goal. Your true rate is a calculation of the difference between or the division between your net profit and the amount of hours that you've actually invested with this client, which will give you the rate difference, or essentially how much you lost or maybe made based off of the hours that you've invested with this client. And of course, if it's a loss, they'll give you the amount of money you actually lost by spending more time working with this client. Essentially, this is the amount of money based off of your sunk cost, or you committing that you wanted to work with this person even though this person started to provide you diminishing returns. This will give you the exact number of how much you've lost by either wasting or investing additional time with said client. And of course, the hour overage, which is the amount of time that you truly invested minus the estimated invested time, so that you can kind of see where you need to trim off. So let's say that, for example, estimated time is 20 hours and you ended up spending 30 hours working with this client. That means that there's going to be a difference of 10 hours, and that 10 hours is where we need to figure out how to optimize so that we can reduce it to essentially increase your hourly rate. Now, again, I want to remind you, like, this is a habit that needs to be done every single day. So time block for it maybe at the end of your day so that you can come in here and then compute these numbers, because it's going to be super important in the long run, especially when we're starting to analyze this data. But that said, this is going to be completely confusing to you. So I want to give you a quick example of like what this would look like in real time. So here at the bottom tab, there's a tab called example. This is an example of a deal I worked on for April to sell her mom's house via probate. Very high level stuff. I didn't go too deep into the description, but expectation is you should, because the deeper you go, the easier this becomes. But here's a quick kind of run through. Started the initial conversation June 2nd. We went through about, I'd say 3 months, 2 months, June, July, yeah, good, give or take, in terms of marketing before I was able to get this exclusive right to sell agreement signed. And then from there, it was just kind of running through the whole process of fulfillment, getting this house prepped, getting offers in, or doing open houses, getting offers in, getting into escrow, then closing escrow, so on and so forth. Now, the total commission off of this was $17,775. What I said was my hourly rate is $1,000 an hour, so I computed that here. So essentially, I should have only in order to make sure I match my hourly rate, I should have only expected to spend 18 hours with the timeline of this whole transaction. The reality is I ended up spending 31 hours or 31.05 hours. So my true hourly rate in helping April is actually $572.46, leaving a difference of $427.54 and a net loss of essentially 13 grand. At 18 hours, if I was tracking this properly, I would be at $1,000, but since it took me 31 hours to get everything through the pipeline, reality is I didn't really make as much as I was supposed to, and I actually lost 13 grand based off of my expectation of my hourly rate. And this is the magic number here, 13. This is the hour overage that I had in terms of getting my expected desired hourly rate. Now, there are really two KPIs that I really want to emphasize once you have all of this data. The first one being time. Once you've done a few transactions, you'll find an average time that is required to be spending per client to find your optimal hourly rate. And I don't know, let's say for example that hourly or that number of hours is 80 hours. If you end up spending more than 80 hours on average on a client, then your hourly rate drops and then it just simply becomes diminishing returns. And at that point, you then need to reevaluate your time investment with each client, because this relationship will end up turning into a sunk cost or a negative return on investment based off of that hourly rate. Now, the second thing that I want to emphasize, the second KPI, is the task itself. And I want to go back to an old adage that I was taught, and that is, what is repeated can be recorded. Now, if we're talking about trying to optimize for this hourly overage, how can we get this number lower? The way you have to think about it is like this. If it's a repetitive task, we can save time by simply recording a video. You can use an application like Loom, for example. But the point of this is record this video with the instructions or the big ideas for this particular task. Then either send this video to a client to provide next steps so that you save your time and your effort, because you're just ending up repeating yourself, or you can send this to an assistant to complete the task, which inevitably will be at a lower hourly rate than your true value. It's gonna take a little legwork to set this up at first, but the simple process of doing this will immediately save you a ton of time, thereby increasing your hourly rate. Now again, a quick reminder, this process is going to be a test in self-discipline at first. So the secret to this is really just to time block the end of your day to work on time tracking. It's a daily habit, but once you build the muscle memory of doing this, you'll find that you'll have a wealth of information to play with, because at the end of the day, what can be measured can be improved. All right, one last thing to mention about this. I presented you with a Google Sheet, but once you get into the habit of doing this, there's some really great applications out there that can essentially compute the same information. An app that we use internally, it's called Time Doctor. It'll allow you to do the exact same thing, and then you can just track this information from the app on your phone or maybe on your desktop. All right, if you want to jam on a little bit more about this, we talk about this kind of stuff inside of our free Facebook group, leaving the description in the link below. And if you enjoyed this video, then I highly recommend that you check out this video here. Bye now.